Oh, you sold everything? Charity must have visited today. Oh, those look wonderful, Adanna. Are they for your special recipe?
The market of Onko village had seen many things, but never this. A woman raised her hand and struck a young girl across the face. Not a theatrical gesture, but a full, deliberate blow. The sound split the air like a cutlass through dry wood. The girl did not fall, did not cry out. She stood still as stone, a thin line of blood at her lip, her eyes fixed on her attacker with a calm that was more unsettling than any rage. What nobody in that frozen market knew was that this quiet, overlooked herb seller was not who they thought she was. And the man watching from the shadows, a prince in disguise, was about to change everything. Before we go any further, please like this video, subscribe to Helen Folktale, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you are watching from. Your support brings these stories to life. Now, let's begin. The market of Onko village had witnessed many things across its long and unhurried years. Arguments over grain prices, reconciliations between families who had not spoken for a decade, births announced with ululations that carried 3 streets away, deaths mourned quietly over smoldering pepper soup. But the people who were present on that particular Wednesday morning would carry what they saw with them for the rest of their lives. She raised her hand and struck the girl across the face. Not a theatrical gesture, not a performance of power. A full, deliberate strike. Palm flat, wrist turned, the kind of blow that announces, I am not afraid of what this costs me. The sound of it split the market air the way a cutlass splits dry wood. Sharp, final, impossible to unhear. Every vendor froze mid-transaction. A woman with a basket of okra on her head turned so fast, the basket slid. A child who had been laughing at something stopped laughing. An old pepper seller half rose from her stool. The girl who had been struck did not fall, did not cry out, did not raise her hands to her face. She stood with the absolute stillness of someone who had made long ago and in private a decision about exactly how much this world was permitted to move her. A thin line of blood gathered at the corner of her lower lip. The red print of 4 fingers bloomed slowly across her left cheek. Her eyes, dark and level and completely, devastatingly unbroken, stayed fixed on the woman who had hit her with a calm that was somehow more unsettling than any reaction could have been. Not crying, never crying. And at the far end of the market square, half swallowed by the deep morning shadow of a traveling merchant's awning, a young man in a plain dark traveling cloak took one short step forward, then stopped himself. Not yet. His chest was tight, his hands were not steady. His name was Prince Obina Okafo, second son of the Obi of the great Enugu kingdom, heir to nothing yet and heir to everything depending on how the next several months fell. And that girl standing silently in the center of the frozen market with blood on her lip and a stillness in her eyes that looked less like defeat and more like the eye of a storm gathering itself was his forbidden bride. Nobody in that market knew it yet. Not the woman who had raised her hand, not the crowd that had gone silent, not the girl herself. But he did. And it was time, finally, unavoidably time, to stop watching from the shadows. Stay with me, my dear friends, and I will tell you this story from the very beginning. Her name was Adanna. If you had asked the village of Onko what they thought of Adanna, most of them would have offered you a shrug and a vague summary. Blacksmith's daughter, parents gone, sells herbs at the Wednesday market, quiet girl, plain, keeps to herself. None of that was wrong exactly. It simply missed the whole picture, the way a man who has only seen a river in dry season might describe it as a thin stream of little consequence. Adanna was 20 years old. She was not what the village called beautiful, at least not by the standards the village had decided on and saw no reason to revisit. Her skin was the deep, warm brown of good earth after a heavy rain. Her nose was broad and straight, her natural hair grew thick and proud, and she kept it wrapped most days in a piece of old orange cloth, because she had neither the time nor the coin for elaborate dressing. Her hands were calloused, her sandals worn thin at the heel, and her wrapper was always clean but never new. Her mother had died of river fever when Adanna was 4. The baby her mother had been carrying went with her. A brother Adanna spent several years grieving without ever knowing him. Her father, Emeka, had been a blacksmith of unusual skill, the kind of craftsman that other craftsmen traveled distances to watch work. But before he had picked up his hammer, before he had chosen the forge and the village and the quiet life, he had been something else entirely. He had studied at the feet of a court scholar for 6 years. He had read everything he could reach. He had walked away from it all deliberately, for reasons he never fully explained, and built a life with his hands instead of his mind. But the mind had never left. He kept every book, 2 full cedar chests of them, law, history, botany, the ancient oral records written down in the old script, the genealogies of the great families, the codes of the elder compact. He had taught Adanna to read before she was 5. He had taught her to think. He had made her memorize the names of plants in 3 languages before she was allowed to sell a single bundle at the market. He had died 3 years ago of a wasting illness that came in the dry season and did not leave. And Adanna had found herself at 17 entirely alone. She had managed. She always managed. She grew and gathered and dried and sold. She fixed things for neighbors in exchange for small favors. She ate simply and she kept her head below the waterline of anyone's particular attention. And she moved through the village like something that did not require acknowledgement. Invisibility, she had discovered, was its own kind of armor. But there was one thing the village did not know about Adanna. On a thin cord around her neck, beneath her wrapper, against her skin, she wore a small iron ring. Plain worked metal, no decoration, no jewel, nothing that would catch the eye. Only a single small mark pressed into the band, like a brand, like an initial, like a seal. Her father had pressed it into her palm the last night of his life, his voice already thinning to something barely above breath. Adanna, there is a promise that was made before you were born, a living oath sealed the old way between 2 men who had nothing in the world to offer each other except their honor. When the time comes, the other half of this promise will find you. The ring will be recognized. Do not be afraid. Do not run from it. She was 17 and she had not fully understood. She wore the ring every day and kept his words folded somewhere deep inside herself and told no one. The village did not need to know. The village was already busy deciding what it thought of her. Chiamaka was the only daughter of Chief Okonkwo, who governed the eastern quarter of the province, from a large compound with too many oil lamps and not enough wisdom. His chief had acquired his position through a combination of inherited land, strategic marriages, and the particular talent of making powerful men feel more important than they were. Her daughter had absorbed every method and added an edge of her own. She was beautiful, genuinely, structurally beautiful, the kind of face that stopped conversations. She wore silk wrappers in 3 colors. Her hair was always dressed by someone whose job was only to dress it. She had a laugh that filled compounds and a cruelty she had perfected the art of disguising as humor. For the past 9 months, Adanna had been her preferred target. It had begun as it always does with these things, small and almost accidental looking, a comment at the market, a remark delivered loud enough for an audience, small, precise cruelties that could be called jokes if anybody pushed back. The village laughed or looked away. Nobody wanted to be the person who defended a blacksmith's daughter over a joke. And Adanna, true to everything she had trained herself to be, said nothing, picked up whatever had been knocked over, rebuilt whatever had been disrupted, went home. But on this Wednesday morning, Chiamaka had come to the market with something new and harder in her perception, and she had come prepared with the specific kind of cruelty that stops being a game. It had actually been a remarkable morning for once. Adanna had sold nearly everything before midday. A traveling medicine trader from the capital had bought all 8 of her dried fever root bundles without bargaining, had examined her ground bitter back with the scrutiny of a man who knew what he was looking at, and had told her with the frank authority of someone who moved between 50 markets a year that her preparation was the finest he had encountered outside the palace district. She had smiled genuinely, a thing that happened rarely enough that she noticed it happening, and was wrapping her empty basket to leave when she felt it. The change in the air that always announced Chiamaka before Chiamaka appeared. She arrived with 2 attendants today, moving through the market the way weather moves through. You feel the temperature drop before the clouds are overhead. She had that particular look on her face today. Not the bored cruelty of routine, something more deliberate, something she had brought with her from home. The comments came in their usual sequence: the exaggerated surprise at the empty stall, the suggestion that Charity must have visited today, the laughter of the attendants, timed and trained. Adanna kept her hands moving, kept wrapping, kept not looking up. She was nearly done. Her baskets were nearly packed. She was nearly free of this particular morning. Then Chiamaka leaned in close. Her voice dropped to something that was for Adanna alone, and she said, having clearly made some effort beforehand to find the specific place that no armor reaches, she said Adanna's mother's name. She described how she had died. She added something about the baby. She laughed as she said it. The market continued around them. No one heard this part. Inside Adanna, something that had been built over 3 years of careful, deliberate construction cracked along a line she hadn't known was forming. She lifted her eyes. For the first time in longer than she could measure, she looked directly at Chiamaka. Not the careful downward glance she used for navigating, not the peripheral awareness of someone monitoring a threat. She looked at her, fully, steadily, the way you look at something when you have finally decided it no longer has the right to look away from. And Chiamaka, who had practiced cruelty on Adanna for 9 months with the full confidence of someone who believed the other person was too diminished to look back, felt something move through her chest that she would spend the next several weeks refusing to name. It was fear. She covered it the only way she knew how. Her hand came up and came down. The sound of it split the market like a thunderclap. Adanna stood completely still, blood at the corner of her lip, the red print of 4 fingers across her left cheek. Her eyes still open, still level, still fixed on Chiamaka with that unbearable, absolute calm. Not crying, never crying. And from the far end of the market, the man in the dark cloak who had been standing in the shadow of the merchant's awning for 11 days took one step forward and decided he had been still long enough. What he did next, none of them were ready for it. Not Chiamaka, not the market, not Adanna herself. His name was Prince Obinna Okafor, second son of the Obi of the Enugu Kingdom, a realm that stretched 4 provinces wide and was currently being slowly pulled apart at its seams by a succession crisis that had gone unresolved for 2 years because the Obi had 3 sons, 1 throne, and a political situation too complicated to resolve cleanly. Obinna was 24 years old. He was not what the court called impressive, not in the ways the court meant. His older brother Ifeayi was broader, louder, more practiced in every performance of power that courts require. Obinna was the quiet one, the one who read too much, the one who asked inconvenient questions in council meetings that exposed problems nobody wanted to name. The court had decided long ago that he was not the threat. The court was wrong. He had come to Enugu village in secret, traveling without his royal escort, wearing a merchant cloak and carrying nothing that identified him. He had come because 6 weeks ago, his father's head archivist had found something buried in the oldest part of the palace record house, a cedar chest inside a sealed inner room, not opened in 30 years. Inside the chest was a marriage contract, sealed the old way, iron ring pressed into cooling black wax, blood signatures from both parties, witnessed by 2 names of sufficient standing to make the document legally unassailable. Written 40 years ago between the current Obi, then a young prince traveling alone and off-road, and a blacksmith named Emeka of Enugu village, who had found him at the bottom of a collapsed road embankment in the middle of a night rainstorm. His horse was dead. His arm was broken in 2 places. The floodwater was rising. The blacksmith had carried him on his back to higher ground, reset the broken arm with cloth and 2 straight sticks, built a fire, and kept him alive until a search party found them. The prince had had nothing in the world to offer this man. No coin, no land title that could be granted without causing political disruption, no way to repay the unpayable. What he had was his word. And so 2 men sat by a fire on a dark road and made a promise in the oldest tradition, a living death oath, sealed in blood, witnessed, binding to bloodline. The firstborn daughter of the blacksmith's line would be given in marriage to the prince's second son when the time was right. When Obinna had been shown this document, his first response was anger. He was not a treaty clause. He refused to be bound by a contract written before he existed. He demanded it be dissolved. His father had looked at him with those old, exhausted, deeply private eyes and said, "This promise was made between 2 men who had nothing left in the world except their word. If you break it, you break not just a clause, you break the one thing left in this kingdom that has not yet been compromised for convenience. Read it carefully before you decide." Obinna had read it. He had left for Enugu village the next morning, telling himself he was coming to assess the situation, to find the girl, evaluate whether the contract could be retired quietly with generous compensation, and return to his real problems. He had arrived 11 days ago. He had found her at the market in the first morning. He had watched her for 11 days. He had watched her slip extra bundles of dried herbs to elderly women who came up short on coin, turning away before they could try to thank her. He had watched her recite without hesitation and in 3 languages the botanical names of plants that traveling physicians had to look up in reference books. He had followed her once to the wide, flat rock at the river bend where she went in the evenings, and he had stood in the trees at a distance and watched her sit with her feet in the current, talking to the water quietly, not praying, not performing anything, just talking to it the way you talk to something old and trustworthy and on your side. He had stood in those trees far longer than any reasonable assessment required. He had known he was no longer simply assessing. And then today, the market, the slap, the blood, the eyes that did not break. He stepped out of the shadow. Enough. One word. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The word moved through the market the way a stone moves when you drop it into still water, ripples expanding in all directions, touching every surface. Every face turned toward the sound. He pushed back the hood of his traveling cloak. What happened to Chiamaka's face in the next 3 seconds was something the merchant vendors would describe in detail to their families that evening. The color left it, not gradually, not as a flush or a blush, all at once, completely, the way a lamp goes out. She had been to the provincial capital twice for her father's official functions. She had stood in the great reception hall of the palace. She had seen the portrait in the 3rd corridor, the one painted 2 years ago that the whole province had been told about. She knew that face. Her mouth opened. His eyes moved to her, and they were not unkind, but they were not negotiating either. He said, "Whatever you are about to say, do not say it here." He walked through the parted crowd until he was standing beside Adanna, not in front of her. He did not stand in front of her as if she needed covering. He stood beside her, at her shoulder, the way one person stands with another when they are choosing a side. He looked at her. She looked at him with the same measured, recalculating attention she gave everything that required assessment. Brow slightly drawn, eyes direct, giving nothing away before she had decided what to give. "I do not know you," she said. "No," he agreed, "but I know you, and there is something between us that needs to be discussed, if you are willing to hear it." He reached into his cloak and brought out something small, an iron ring on a thin cord, plain worked metal, a single small mark pressed into the band, exactly like the one she wore against her skin. The air left Adanna's body, not with shock, with something older and more precise than shock, the feeling of something you have been carrying so long you stopped feeling its weight, suddenly connecting with what it was always meant to connect with. Her hand rose to her chest instinctively, to the cord beneath her wrapper. "My father gave me this the night he died," she said. Her voice was barely sound. "And mine gave me this," he said. "They made a promise on a dark road a long time ago, Adanna, a living death oath, sealed in blood, witnessed, and unbreakable. I spent 6 weeks deciding whether to honor it. He held the ring steady in his open palm. I am done deciding. The market around them had gone so completely silent that the sound of the river 3 streets away reached them easily. Chiamaka stood in the center of the frozen crowd with the red print of her own decision still on the air and said nothing at all. But neither Obinna nor Adanna was looking at her anymore. And what happened in the 3 days that followed would change everything, for reasons that neither of them could have fully anticipated. In a small village, a secret lives for approximately 12 hours before it becomes common knowledge. By the evening of that Wednesday, every compound in Nkwo knew. By the following morning, a rider had left for the capital at speed. On the 3rd day, Prince Ifeanyi arrived. He came with 16 palace soldiers, a document carrying the royal council's wax seal, and the particular energy of a man who had done a rapid calculation and found the outcome deeply alarming. Because Ifeanyi, older by 4 years, broader in shoulder, louder in every room, and deeply, comprehensively aware that he had always been positioned as the natural heir, understood immediately what a binding living debt marriage contract meant in the context of an unresolved succession. It meant Obinna had a foundation. It meant the elder compact stood behind him. It meant the quiet second son, whom the court had spent years comfortably underestimating, was no longer without footing. Ifeanyi arrived smiling. He was very good at that. The meeting was arranged in the governor's reception room, Chief Okonkwo hosting with the visible discomfort of a man who had suddenly found 2 competing royal forces in his sitting room and no safe position from which to watch. Ifeanyi settled into the central chair with the ease of a man whose whole life has arranged itself around him. His eyes moved to Adanna, who sat with her hands folded, wearing a clean, deep blue wrapper, her natural hair unbound for the first time anyone in this room had seen. He smiled at her with all his teeth. "My dear," Ifeanyi said smoothly, his voice warm and entirely manufactured. "But surely you are a practical woman. A contract written in a rainstorm 40 years ago by 2 men in a crisis with no formal legal witness of court standing. This cannot be expected to hold in any serious review." "Which court?" Adanna said. A pause. "I beg your pardon?" Ifeanyi said. "Which court are you referring to?" She kept her voice entirely level, entirely pleasant. The contract was sealed under the right of living debt, not civil law, not trade law, not contract law as the Royal Council defines it. The right of living debt does not fall under the authority of the Elder Compact, which predates the Council by no fewer than 180 years, and which explicitly states, in language that has never been amended because it cannot be amended, that no body established by a reigning Obi, including the Obi himself, may review, revise, or dissolve a living debt oath once it has been sealed and witnessed. Silence in the room, the kind of silence that has a specific texture. The witness signatures on the document are legally valid. The iron seals are matched and verified. I have seen them myself. The blood marks were authenticated by your own archivist notation on the cover page of the document. There is no court, no council, and no legal framework currently in operation in this kingdom under which that contract is anything other than exactly what it is, binding. Ifeanyi looked at her for a long moment. "How do you know the law?" he said carefully. "My father was a blacksmith," Adanna said. "Before that, he was a trained court scholar. He kept every book he had ever read, 2 cedar chests of them. I had a great many quiet years and nothing else to do." From his position near the window at the edge of the room, Obinna was watching her. There it was again, the thing that had been growing in him since the first morning at the river, now too large and too certain to continue arguing with. He had come here to dissolve a contract. He was beginning to understand he had found something he had no interest in dissolving at all. That evening, he found her at the river. She was on her flat rock, feet bare and trailing in the current, hands in her lap, the iron ring held between both palms, watching the water move past. She heard him coming. She did not look up.
"I thought you would come," she said. He took off his sandals and sat beside her on the rock. "The contract gives us a frame," he said quietly. "What we choose to build inside it belongs to us alone. It can be nothing. It can be something neither of us has words for yet. But I would like, if you are willing, the chance to find out." The river flowed past them in the growing dark, unhurried and familiar. Adanna held the iron ring out in her open palm between them. He held his out. 2 rings on 2 palms, 2 halves of a promise made on a dark, flooded road 40 years ago by 2 men who had nothing in the world to offer each other except their word, and who believed that was enough.
"Do not make this into something I have to survive," she said. "I am very tired of surviving things." "I know," he said. "So am I." What followed was not a story of instant transformation. Life does not work in instant transformations. It works in the slow, patient accumulation of choices made in the right direction, one after another, until the direction becomes clear. But things did change. Ifeanyi's legal challenge to the contract was brought before the Elder Compact Tribunal 11 days later. The presiding elder read the document once, examined the seals, set it down, looked at Ifeanyi's legal representative for a long moment. "This is not a question," he said. "This is a contract. Come back to me with something that is a question." The challenge was dismissed in 14 minutes. Ifeanyi left Uncle Village 3 days later without speaking to his brother or looking back. As for Chiamaka, what happened to her was not a royal decree. Nobody organized against her, nobody made a public announcement. It was quieter than that, and in its quietness, more final. The market vendors who had laughed at her performances stopped laughing. The women who had always made a point of greeting her first stopped going out of their way to do so. The village found, in the aftermath of what it had witnessed, that its own silence had accumulated a weight it was no longer comfortable carrying. Some silences, it turns out, have an expiry date. The Obi, when the full account of everything reached him, sat with it for a long time. He read the archivist's summary, he read the tribunal's ruling, he sat with it. Then he looked at his son and said, "Your grandfather, the one who built the Eastern Road, the one who everyone said was too serious and too principled to survive politics, he would have known exactly what to make of her." Obinna, for the first time in a very long time, smiled at his father simply. Not strategically, not carefully, simply. As for Adanna, she never made herself small again. Not because of what a title gave her, not because of what a palace meant for her safety or standing. She had never required saving in the way the world had assumed a woman like her required saving. She stopped making herself small because she finally understood what her father had been trying to tell her with his last breath on that last night. The ring was never about a contract. It had been a message from a man who had known, with the complete, unshakable certainty of someone who had watched this child think and grow and learn and survive, that her daughter was extraordinary, and who had wanted to make sure before he left that the world would one day be required to agree. She wore both rings from that day forward, one for her father, one for what came next. Being overlooked is not the same as being unworthy. It only means that the wrong people were looking. There are people in this world who have spent years making themselves smaller, quieter, less visible, less demanding of the space they deserve because the world around them did not pay close enough attention. They began to believe the assessment. They began to carry it. But the assessment was never true. It only felt true because it came from every direction. Your worth is not determined by who fails to see it. My dear friends, if you have stayed with me all the way to the end of this story, I want you to know that means everything to me. This is the kind of story we pour our whole heart into at Helen Folktale. If this story found something in you today, please share it with one person who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below and tell me which moment hit you hardest and where in this beautiful world you are watching from. I read every single one. If you are new to Helen Folktale, welcome home. We tell stories like this every single week. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss one. Now, click on the video on your screen right now for another powerful African folktale that will touch your heart. Good night.